From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 304, recorded live Thursday, February 2nd, 2012. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this episode, Scott talks with Peter Mourfield about creating applications with PhoneGap.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today we're talking about mobile development, specifically with a thing called PhoneGap. I recently released a Windows Phone 7 application. I've been learning about Silverlight and how to write an application for Windows Phone, and feeling pretty proud of myself. And then I take a look at my buddy Pete's website, and he's come out with an application that works on iOS and on Android. He did it with a thing called PhoneGap. Thanks, Pete, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So PhoneGap, you're not a Silverlight guy. How did you come up with an Android app and an iPhone app out of nowhere?
Scott, I was looking for an application for my boys who are both Boy Scout age to be able to manage some of their achievements of Boy Scouts, and I didn't see anything, and I've always kind of wanted to dip into this world of iPhone and Android development and really haven't had the cycles to go out and learn Objective-C and figure out all the different things I needed to do to develop something specific for each platform. So I got to looking around, and I found PhoneGap out there, which allows me to leverage a lot of the skills that I use every day as a web developer and be able to produce these apps kind of on one code base.
Right. You're one of my contributors to Nerd Dinner. You and John Peterson and John Galloway have helped me with some of the newer versions of Nerd Dinner. So I know you as an ASP.NET JavaScript kind of an expert. Do you, this PhoneGap, is this an IDE like Eclipse or Visual Studio?
So PhoneGap, you can think of it as a project template that you would get for each of the platforms that you want to deliver to. It's something that you can download and you can install, either for, the Mac development environment or the Android SDK or something like that. Or you can do kind of what I did. And PhoneGap has a service in the cloud called Build. And basically what you do with Build is you package up your HTML and then you offload it to the Build service. They wrap it up in their little project template and then spit you back binaries.
Okay. So I have a zip file here that I downloaded from PhoneGap, and it's got a lib folder, and in it has got Android and BlackBerry and Symbian and Windows and all this stuff.
Right.
But it doesn't have a start here. It's not 100% clear. Am I doing all this work in a text editor?
Right. So there's two sides to it. One is basically what I think you downloaded. It's these project templates that you can use and start working with projects on your Mac or in the Android SDK. And the PhoneGap guys rely on you to kind of go to their wiki, and they have some great walkthroughs there that help you kind of get started with those. The other side of that is basically the same thing you have downloaded that you would run on your Mac or you would run in the Android SDK. They've built a service around that, and literally you're just pushing up HTML to it, and then they're spitting you back a binary.
I see. Okay, so I thought that somehow I would be working in this PhoneGap IDE and doing all my work in one place and then pushing out different versions of my application. But you're saying that I'm actually using the tools for the phone that I want to target. So it's more of a pull thing. And by that I mean, if I want to write a Windows Phone PhoneGap application, I'll be using the Windows Phone SDK, but I'll be using the PhoneGap libraries. And if I want to write an iOS application using PhoneGap, I'm still going to be using Xcode and setting up the project that way.
Right. That's one way of doing it, and that's the way a lot of people are doing it, especially if they want to use a lot of custom behaviors with some of the hardware on the device. I took a different approach. I don't have a Mac. I wanted to try and that's why PhoneGap excited me, is because I could develop for this thing without having a Mac. Basically, with the Build service, they do all of that stuff, building on the Mac and setting up your projects and all that. They do all that for you under the covers through the service. And all you do is you build your HTML package, using JavaScript and CSS and do all the things that you want to do, zip that thing up, and you go onto their service, their build.phonegap.com, that's what I think it is, upload it, and then they spit you back the binaries there on the website.
Wow. Okay. So there's multiple ways. So I could make templates within my local development environment, or I can do what you just described, and then their web service, it's like a cloud of virtual machines. They have a build server in the sky, and then they'll spit these things out. Now, why did you pick Android and iOS? If you could do it in the sky, how come you didn't just say, do them all?
Well, in all honesty, when you push to the sky, it pushes you back everything. With the exception of Windows Phone 7, which I think they're working on now. I just chose to kind of put all my effort behind getting in the store the iPhone and the Android because those are the two big players in that subset.
And where did you do your work? Were you in a text editor or were you in Visual Studio? I know you're a Windows guy.
Yeah, I was actually in Visual Studio, and I was just adding HTML files, and I used jQuery Mobile to go along with it to kind of format my views, and I was literally just using the text editor there in Visual Studio. And then when I was done, I wouldn't do a build. I would package everything up in a zip file and ship it up to the PhoneGap build server.
So can you just hit F5 and test it in like IE or Chrome when you want to see how it's going?
Yeah, you really can, especially as I was using jQuery Mobile, so I could kind of see how things would look. Kind of going through the process, the one thing I learned, because I wasn't testing on native devices, I really kind of needed to go and try and test on at least the browsers that were native to that. So obviously, if I wanted to test things for iOS, I'd need to go and run it in Safari and that kind of stuff.
So if I just wrote this Windows Phone app, and I went File New Project, and I said Windows Phone app, and I wrote a bunch of XAML. If you're going to write a PhoneGap application for Windows Phone, you say File New PhoneGap Starter, and then instead of making a bunch of XAML files, you make a www folder, kind of like it's a web server, and you put your CSS and your JavaScript and everything in there. And then when you hit F5, does it still look like it should on the phone, or does it look like some kind of weird, because you know how Java never looked right anywhere? It always looked like Java.
When I do my testing, it looks fairly close to what you end up with on the device. It's slightly different what you get back, and sometimes you have to trace down device-specific issues. So, if you're doing this, you should at some point, have an iPhone and have an Android and be able to at least run it before you try and push it to the store. But really, that's it. It's package up the HTML and just kind of ship off and forget. And, there's little things here and there that you had to kind of worry about, and it's the same thing we worry about kind of as web developers, right? So my app uses local storage to kind of remember things on each device. And each browser kind of handles local storage just a little bit differently, and so you had to kind of find a way to play with local storage that they all liked.
And the applications, as far as like the marketplace, they don't know that you're using PhoneGap. It's not like PhoneGap made a deal with all these marketplaces. So you're going to still need like an Android manifest for Android, and you'll still need a Windows Phone manifest for Windows Phone, things like that, right?
Right, and that's the good thing about the build services. If you upload with your HTML, you upload a config.xml file that lists out a bunch of things like splash screens and icons and all of those kinds of things with your application. And the binaries they spit you back have all that stuff built into it.
Okay. When I see examples of people doing things like this in HTML, they're usually pretty basic. Maybe you see them at a conference or you watch a video, and someone will go and write a calculator or something basic. But those things usually don't have a database or a web service or services behind them. But your application is got a lot of information. You've got it looks like dozens or hundreds of merit badges and details and information about those and all the different things that a Boy Scout has to do to become an Eagle Scout. HTML isn't something that I think of when I think about databases. And since you don't have a server, how are you doing that? How are you querying information and putting it on the screen?
Really, at this point in the app, I'm using local storage to kind of remember things, and then, for example, there's 136 merit badges, I think it is. all I did was I created a page for everyone, kind of just brute force through it. Now, there is access to kind of the some database on the device stuff that you can do in PhoneGap, and I've seen a lot of chatter around it. I just haven't messed with it too much.
When you say local DB, you're talking about like HTML5's database access?
Correct. Yeah, and really anything that you can do with HTML5 that these browsers support, you can do in PhoneGap. And then, again, I would kind of be remiss not to mention that the PhoneGap guys have built a lot of plugins that allow you to access hardware on the devices too, and they've done that in a way that you can get at through JavaScript. So if you wanted to access the accelerometer or the camera, stuff like that, they've got kind of JavaScript plugin APIs available through their PhoneGap.js that you can use to get at hardware on the device too.
So that was my next question. So first, on the database side, you can you're using JavaScript. Like, for example, you have a thing where you can search your merit badges. So you're saying merit badges don't change, so you don't need to go to a database for that. You just have a hard-coded list of the merit badges. Right. And then as you're going to start tracking progress and enhancing the application to say, these are the badges that I have, those things will then be stored in the local database.
That's correct.
Using HTML5. And is this because all of these phones have HTML5? I mean, PhoneGap is basically running a native app and then hosting their own browser inside of it, right? Like, so if you're on iPhone, you're looking at Safari inside of a frame.
That's exactly what they do is they have a browser view or a browser object running within their app, and then they're just serving this content back up to it. So what HTML5 gives you is all these browsers support HTML5 more or less, and it gives you kind of a common development platform to kind of do the same thing across each of the devices.
The JavaScript APIs that you're calling, so this is just PhoneGap specific JavaScript, and then somehow they're making like window.external, or how are they letting you see the external libraries and things like cameras?
I don't know a lot of the details behind how they're doing some of that specific stuff, but
right. But what kind of things are available? Like, would I actually write code that says, oh, this device has an accelerometer, let my user know, and this device doesn't, so hide it? Because I realize that you can't write an application that's going to run perfectly everywhere. Would you find yourself saying, oh, I'm on an Android, then do this other whole thing that I wouldn't be doing on another platform?
You very well could do that. I've seen a lot of chatter around device-specific issues they've had with different hardware stuff, and the guys at PhoneGap are really great about kind of staying on top of questions and issues that have come up, and they also run pretty quickly through, if they've identified issues, they'll put out releases pretty quickly to address those issues.
And were you able to work from a single source? Because as I'm kind of learning about this, I'm seeing that there's like you said, multiple ways to do it. You can use PhoneGap's layer of abstraction and count on them to do the right thing. But if you find as you're developing your application that, man, the Android one just doesn't work right the way I want it, or the iPhone one, the drop downs don't look correct. I mean, how many times did you get yourself in a situation like that where it worked on one and not the other, and how did you get through it?
Right. So honestly, I started with the outset, and this is where jQuery Mobile helped me. Started from the outset of kind of developing it kind of in the jQuery Mobile way, so it worked as many places as it could. Mm-hmm. The only time that I've run into issues with device-specific and browser-specific things is, and quite honestly, is in dealing with this Windows Phone 7 one that I'm trying to get out now. And it doesn't like playing with the PhoneGap quite as nicely as some of the other things do. But
and is that something that PhoneGap talks about on their forums?
They do talk about the ongoing support for Windows Phone 7. And there's a guy out there, Matt Lacey, who's got a kind of a Windows Phone 7 project plugin that you can still use the same source that I ship off with my iPhone and Android version, but it allows it to play a little nicer with the browser.
What do you think about this style of development? Was there any time while you were writing your mobile application in HTML where you wished that you just did it in Objective-C, or did it in Java, or did it in C#?
Not for me, there wasn't, Scott. I mean, going out and learning Objective-C and Java and all that was my barrier to entry in this. And PhoneGap is what's allowed me to kind of really dig in. And, put something out that that hopefully will help people out, and at least for no other reason than just being fun for me to kind of write. But I didn't have a lot of time or a lot of cycles to really spin up and learn Objective-C and kind of go through all those things. So for me, this is what got me into it. If I wouldn't have found something like this, then I probably wouldn't have even written this app.
Really, I think you said that really well, that learning those other platforms for you, because, you've got a day job, learning those things is really the barrier. So it's like, to even go and start, it's just not possible.
Right. And this is really what kind of motivated me and got me over the hump to want to go out and do this.
Now, but how come you didn't just make this a website? Like, if you're saying jQuery mobile and everyone's talking about how you can just have someone bookmark your application, why not just make it a website and do everything mobile and forget about the PhoneGap part?
I very well could have done that. I guess my thing was to I wanted to get it in front of people, as many people as I could, and I knew that if I could get it in the app stores or in the marketplaces and people would kind of search for things, then that might help me kind of overcome the noise of the web, if that makes sense. Yeah,
definitely. The idea that I wrote a blog post recently about marketplaces and kind of the what I call the update, the update treadmill, where I feel like I'm always looking at my phone and I've got 15 updates and stuff like that, and I just want my apps to be updated. But at the same time, it's really hard to charge someone 99 cents for a bookmark.
Right, and that's true. It's interesting that you mentioned updates. Updates for me has been a bit of a pain, to be quite honest with you. And it's not through anything that PhoneGap has done. It's dealing with the different marketplaces and kind of their turnaround time when it comes to updates. When I developed this, I kind of ran to market as quick as I could with a V1 that was barely functional and didn't crash, and then very quickly developed some updates for it and got some nice graphics and that kind of stuff, and was able to get it out in the Android store pretty quickly. But we're now sitting on 2 weeks waiting for the Apple Store to approve that update.
Have you had the lovely experience of having people review your application and like say, like I'm looking at your application, it looks like someone gave you a 1-star review because they're saying that they wanted more information, but I'm looking at your app and what he wants is there. I think he's just screwed up.
It's very possible. He has a valid point in that there's more information that I could give, and I'll actually put that out in a later version, but I'm kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place waiting to Apple to issue that update for me. But,
that exact same thing happened to me too.
The interesting thing is I've had a different experience with each marketplace. I've got one thing pending with the Windows Phone marketplace, and the reason it's not out there just yet is my own fault. I did something wrong, so I just submitted a patch. But Android kind of, once you get approved and you want to start pushing updates, they're going to let you just push updates. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't know. But I push an update and it's available that day. With Apple, man, they're pretty brutal. Not brutal in the sense that they're really tough on kind of the standards that they have. They have their standards and they are what they are. It's just, it takes forever to get something through there, it seems.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen to me with my little application, my little, image editor deal. I accidentally lost 3 days because I was wandering around inside the marketplace and I changed a misspelling in the description of the application. And then when I hit submit, that was a new submission. So even though I just changed a misspelling, I had to wait, a day for them to approve it.
Right.
That seems like a big problem. I mean, this whole marketplace concept, the idea that there are people in charge and I have to wait around. I mean, what must that feel like to have a team of dozens of people or hundreds working on an application? Do they all like hover around the CEO's machine while he hits submit and then they kind of wait 3 days to launch their their new startup?
That's exactly a very interesting problem in that, think about software development as a whole. I mean, I think we've all kind of been there when we ship something and then as soon as the first customer hits it, you're like, oh crap, we forgot X. And now since you're in this marketplace world, if you forgot X, it could be who knows how long before you're able to get that out, and then now your reputation is sullied and no one wants to come back to you.
Exactly. The amount of attention to detail for these things is immense, because as web programmers, and I think you and I are similar in this, if you make a mistake, you've got a continuous integration build. You can get that thing updated in an hour, or you're deploying continuously all day, and you just tell the user, hit F5.
Right.
But imagine if someone could go to your website, click, oh, this sucks, and hit 1 star, ruin your good review, your perfect reviews, and then leave. They'll never come back, and it's going to take you a week to update it.
Exactly, and that's what I'm up against right now. So, hopefully if any of the Hanselman listeners go out there and grab it, they'll give me a nice review so I can offset the terrible one I got.
Well, I got a couple of bad reviews myself. I ended up actually reaching out to the guys who gave me bad reviews. I don't know if you try that or not, but apparently you can, like on Windows Phone, their name is also their gamer tag and their Zune tag, so you can email them from the Zune application. So I don't know if that's slightly creepy or if that's really good customer service, but the guy answered and he was like very nice, and he actually helped me find a good bug.
Okay. I'll tell you one thing I learned on the Windows Phone 7 side and getting this into the Windows Phone 7 marketplace is when you have a Windows Phone project open, there's a little thing there's a little menu option in there called Open Marketplace Test Kit. I would highly recommend everybody do that and run through their set of tests before you submit it to the Windows Marketplace, because that really bit me. Really?
Now, what is that? That sounds like something I need.
When you submit something to the Windows Phone Marketplace, they ask you for a bunch of information and images and all kinds of stuff like that, and then they ask you to upload your binary. Well, this is something very similar in that you put in your images, and it will make sure the images are the right size and all that kind of stuff, and it will also look at your binary and basically run a set of runtime, consider it unit tests to see if you're going to make it past some of these automated tests they do in the Windows Phone Marketplace test.
Oh. All right, I got to get this. This sounds very, very, very useful. So it's kind of like FX Cop, or you're doing kind of a check disk on your zip just to catch the stupid things.
Right. So when you're in a Windows Phone 7 app, if you do project about 5 down, it's Open Marketplace Test Kit, and then run through that, and that'll save you some of the headache that I've experienced. Some of my self-imposed headaches in getting into the Windows Phone 7 marketplace.
Well, see, this is stuff I could have used yesterday.
Well,
thanks for letting me know.
Anytime. If you want to know something after the fact, I'm happy to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you know is PhoneGap open source, or is this is a product?
So that's a little gray area as far as I know. The company that produced PhoneGap produced it as open source, but they were recently acquired by Adobe, and I think it may have gone closed source of late, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, we'll have to check it out. I know that Adobe was acquired by Adobe. I suspect if they're doing this thing in the cloud with the building, building things in the cloud, it would make sense to charge for that. And it looks like the PhoneGap build does charge. One developer can do unlimited number of public applications, but if you're going to start doing private apps or corporate applications with PhoneGap, then they start charging. But even then, it's even their most expensive one is not that expensive.
No, it's not at all. So, I guess the moral of the whole story is that, I was able to, without a Mac, produce these apps for Android and iPhone, just by using PhoneGap. And I found that the community is very helpful. They've got some great forums and news groups that are quick to answer questions, and even the guys like Andrew Lundy over there who are running that stuff, they'll email you right back if you have questions.
Have you taken this project that you've done on the side and then thought about it at your work? Like, now that you know how to do this, is this the kind of thing where you could take to your boss and say, hey, we could make a mobile application for whatever we do?
It's funny you should mention that, Scott. In fact, it would appear that we're going to start working on some mobile apps here at work and move forward with them through this medium. We're all Windows ASP.NET C# developers here too, so again, it was the same barrier to entry here at the corporate level that I had personally, in that we don't have anybody who knows, Objective-C or these other things. So that's why we never got into it. But now this is an avenue to help us break into that.
And was this as a result of you taking your moonlighting project and saying, hey, look at this? And they said, oh, wow, this is great. Or did you just say PhoneGap is cool?
No, that's exactly how it was, is we kind of all sat around the table and said, hey, kind of here's how it works, and here's what you get, and here's what you can do, and does this make sense? And I think everybody agreed that it did.
Do you have a sense of what kinds of applications would be good for PhoneGap and what kinds would not? I'm sure there's people out there who are going to produce games for it, and maybe HTML5 style games are good for it. But I'm not sure hardcore Angry Birds kinds of apps would be great on PhoneGap. You probably want, things that are very graphic intensive, you probably want to get as close to the metal as you can. But things like navigational, interacting with data apps like I have, I thought it worked great. I didn't really have any issues with that side of it. Now, what kind of phone do you have personally?
iPhone 4.
And have you downloaded any applications on the iPhone and discovered later that they were PhoneGap applications?
I have not. I have not.
So I wonder if there's no way for you to discover that.
I guess I think PhoneGap has a list on their site at PhoneGap.com of some of the things that are apps that are out there, and I guess that would be just about the only way you could.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is that, I pay attention to this kind of stuff. I'm sure you pay attention to this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Could you notice an application and go, hey, that doesn't feel right? Like, I know that my bank, First Technology Credit Union, has just a horrible, horrible mobile application. It's just awful. And basically all they did was they took their existing mobile site and added a toolbar and then called it an app. And it's not PhoneGap. It's just garbage.
Right. I've seen that quite a bit, and that was something I kind of wanted to stray away from, because it's obviously just, a repackaging of what they've got out there, and it's not, necessarily native for the device. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, loading up an app and going, hey, this must have been done on PhoneGap, I haven't seen anything. The one thing I would say about PhoneGap performance is, interestingly, when you're working with debug versions of your app, you have something built out in the cloud and then you install it on your development phone. Just like any debug build, it's pretty slow, and, giving them all the benefit of the doubt, I am kind of debugging on the iPhone 3, so it's not the fastest thing in the world, but it's amazing to me how once you do a release build and you get that actually installed through the App Store, how much faster it seems. So you really are at the limit of whatever the browser can do. You are, and I guess my other point is don't let some of the slowness you may see in a debug build kind of let you stray away from the platform, because it's been my experience that when you get a release build up and out, the thing performs much better. Interesting. Well, I got to check this out. I wonder if this is going to take off or this will always be a niche, because I think that I'm going to have the guys from MonoTouch on later, because there's so many different ways to do this, right? You could do it in HTML5 and do the PhoneGap thing. Right. You could write it natively, or you could use kind of an intermediary kind of thing like MonoTouch, where they're kind of compiling to native code, but they're making it just so smooth from the front end. Had you looked at MonoTouch or thought about that when you were going to go write your application? Just briefly. I didn't spend a lot of time looking at it. I just found this, and it just sort of made sense when I started looking. So very cool. Well, people can check that out at PhoneGap.com, and if there's any Eagle Scouts, they can check that out at trail2eagle.com. We'll put links to both of those at in the show notes. This is good to know that this is out there. I got to think about. I don't think that it's good for my screen, my photo editor application, like you said. But it sounds like if you were going to make like a conference browser, or for a technical conference, or a database of information, or even a calculator, or an application for there's a million different. My brain is starting to think of a million things I could do. Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean,
if you're going to be entering and browsing and moving around data forward and backward, you could pretty much do anything in HTML. I think I'm going to give this a try and see. Maybe I could make a Nerd Dinner PhoneGap application. You want to try that?
Maybe. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, let's try that. Very cool. Well, thanks, Pete. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Scott. It's been fun.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.